Okay. All right. I'm sharing the right screen, aren't I? Let me just. Yes. Okay, the elephant in the room. And there's not just one of them, there's a herd of elephants in the room, but we're going to look at one of them tonight, which I consider to be one of the most important. So Reaching People project, just in a quick summary, there's 3 pillars to the project: how to have good conversations, how to message very effectively, and then how we're influenced. How does our behavior work? So really, for me, the biggest elephant in the room are the forces that drive behavior. And the reason for this is because most people are unaware that they are unaware. They don't even realize what's driving their behavior because there's this kind of illusion that it's via logic. And this is not something I'll go into today, but I will present in another time. But it's really underpinning that pretty much all of our decisions have an emotional component to them. So quickly, there's 3 kind of important behavior myths that have really been flushed out from behavioral science, and there's many studies to prove these myths, which is number 1, information alone changes behavior. This isn't the case. Hopefully all of us realize this now over the last 2 years. There's so much more to it than just information. If you want to change behavior, you have to change attitudes first. It turns out that this also isn't true. And the clapping to the sky that they did on a Thursday night for the NHS and many other these little kind of behavior modification things showed that, in fact, if you could get people to do a small behavior, you could then see some big attitudes change, which would then sort of domino effect other behaviors. And then this third one, and this is really what I'm going to look at a bit today, is that people understand why they do what they do. And i.e., we think we're driven by logic, but there's so many studies now showing that, in fact, a large amount of the public don't actually know why they do what they do. And a couple of examples is, for instance, in a supermarket, they would play music in the background, and they would play French music, and then the sales of French wines would go up, and they'd play German wine, and the same would happen. So the music in the background was literally affecting people's decisions and behavior, but when they were asked, people denied that it had any effect, and most of them didn't even hear it. There was another study where they were working out which message would get the most recycling of towels in a hotel room. So they tested loads of different messages. They found the most effective and which ones worked in which order. When they then asked people to rate which message would work the best, the one that worked the best, they rated as being the least effective. So they weren't aware of what was really driving their behavior. So this is something that's very common. And what's happened is that behavioral science, I think one of the biggest advancements that they made was they stopped listening to what people said and they started watching what they did. And that's when they started to understand behavior a lot more. And particularly in ourselves, this is very wise to do. There's something in Zen which is talking about hidden actions, hidden behavior. So when we start to look at actually what we do rather than what we plan to do, then we start to see what's really driving us. So this tweet's actually quite profound from Neil Oliver. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll see the depth to why it's so profound. So Neil Oliver said, the next PM is a change of drivers on a train. The train is going where it's scheduled to go on rails already laid. So really, how can we start to strategize and how can we understand? And when we start to understand what's driving behavior, we then see the elephant in the room and a few other things. So what I think is going on is that those that have the understanding of behavioral science at a deep level are effectively playing a game of chess, and those that don't understand it are playing drafts. So we really have to understand the basics of behavioral science, and obviously we wouldn't use it unethically as it's been used by the people pushing the narrative, but it really is important to understand the game. Because if we don't, we're going to make some moves that really do not work. When we do understand it, we can start to do some things that will be very effective. So what we have is we've got this RP model, behavior model. And RP just stands for Reaching People. And basically, we're going to show you the basic board tonight, and then the pieces that go on that board. And from that, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to then show you one of the biggest elephants that there is. So the basic board really is, in most consultants will really work according to this, is that they have point A, and then they have point B. So basically getting from current location or thinking over to a target location of thinking. And obviously you need a pathway or bridge to get to one to the other. And then what they do is they influence Joe in this instance to move from A to B. So that's the basic board. And then within the board, we've got the pieces. And as we go through these slides, you're going to understand piece by piece, and then we're going to put it all together and give an example or two, and then it should make sense. So the basic pieces really on the board are the people and their perceptions, the forces that drive people to move, what is driving behavior, and then the drivers behind these forces. That's what's really key. So then if we look at the basic board with pieces, what we're going to see is that destination, which is B, needs to have a pathway built to it from A, the current location, and then there's forces that will push people, and it's the drivers that create the forces. So how does this look in reality? So we have a group of people that want Joe to comply, so they have to build a pathway to that compliance, and they have to know where Joe is currently. And then in the instance of the pandemic, they created a huge amount of fear, which was driven by the propaganda on the virus, to get Joe to move from where he was to comply. Okay, so this moving from the A to the B. So when we look at how early treatment competes, we then see an example of what the propaganda was seeking to do. So they wanted to get people to take an experimental therapy. So then they wanted a pathway to that, which was labeled the only way out. The only way out pretty much says this is the only option. And that was one of those predictive programming phrases that come out of so many people's mouths because it was placed there. So then you have the current location, and then you've got the forces, which are the fear, and then the drivers, which is the virus, in this instance, safety. Now, obviously, there's no impedance to this. Joe just moves down that only way out path, or he doesn't. But if there was an alternative, say early treatment, what you'll see is that all of the forces pushing Joe that way actually can have an alternate pathway. And that's why early treatment was so dangerous to the narrative, because what you have is the strategy was to take everyone from where they were to the jab, using basically the fear of the virus, creating the emotions to push Joe up this pathway. You know, if he didn't, he was going to kill granny or harm someone. And they used lots of guilt, and there was an actual medical study conducted to see which message would be the most effective. So they literally ran a large-scale study. I think it was like 50,000 people, and they used the guilt message, they used the courage message, follow the science message, all these things. So they were pre-prepared. They knew which ones would work. So if we look at, say, ivermectin as an example, what you'll see is that that's an alternate pathway. So that distributes the forces a different way. So in fact, all the propaganda was to send the forces away from ivermectin, and in many places actually put a roadblock up. So what you'll start to see is this is about watching how the energy moves through the system. They have the destination, they have the current location, it's about moving Joe from A to B. So this is all within behavioral science is known as choice architecture. And it's basically calculating the options that someone will have and then influencing them or nudging them down one pathway over another. And of course, what they did was the pathway to the jab was painted with Teflon, and the pathway to any alternative was painted with sludge. So you'll see now how this nudging really looks in a visual model. This is why this model can be very powerful, because we can map these things out and then really understand what's going on. But the key thing, really, the point to make is it's the forces that are key. Because if you think that you stand in pathway A and Joe actually believes that this pathway is going to save him and his family, and you say don't take it, you become the obstacle to Joe's safety. Whether that's true or not is irrelevant. It's how Joe perceives it that's key. And if there's lots of forces coming down here, you really will get pushed out of the way or shut down. It's really to understand these forces that you can start to work with them to actually guide them another way or get Joe conscious of what's going on. So this is just a classic example of why the forces at play, which effectively really you're going to see are this elephant, is that fear is the currency of control. So this is just, I mean, you'd think this is a comedy, but it's effectively creating the fear as another sort of force, but continually. It's got to keep being topped up. People must be continually afraid. So when we look at the drivers, we've got here, you know, and the drivers in other presentations we go through really are our basic needs, and safety is the key one, which is why it's used so often. And when we look at the forces, then we begin to understand that the forces generally are feelings and emotions. And they were the things that push people, and then people would generally rationalize why they've done things. So if you ask most people why they've done or taken the, you know, the therapy, they're just going to rationalize and try and get defensive. They generally won't know, because so much of this has happened outside their awareness. They've had so much manipulation that they feel like they're on a pathway to be, but they generally won't know why. So the key here is the emotions. So the emotions are always scanning the environment for safety or opportunity. And obviously the safety is going to be triggered continuously. So if somebody believes that masks work and you walk close to them without one, their unconscious mind is going to signal a threat. And therefore they're going to get quite angry at you. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not, it's what they perceive to be true. So then emotions are really these forces that motivate us to act, which is why so much fear was used, because fear is a very big motivator. And then they prepare the body for action, very much often in fight or flight. So then we're getting people moving away from pain and towards pleasure. So the pain is the virus and the pleasure is the relief from the fear of the virus. So moving from A to B, you can see that's a very basic model. That's what's going on. So what we begin to see when we understand this is that the emotion is the elephant in the room, because we, you know, I think it's fair to say we've been fixated with the facts and the data, but they just haven't worked, because you can't really rationalize with someone when they're in an emotional state. Because what emotions do is they distort our perception. So what you'll see is that if somebody's perception is so distorted that they think walking past you might kill them, they are going to shut down the rational part of their mind and they're going to become very emotional. So pretty much anything you say from that logic versus emotion is going to fall on deaf ears. And I think that's something that everyone's experienced. So people's perception is really key, because we've got three aspects of us. And the key here, if we look at the aspects, we've got the conscious mind, which is really rational planning strategy. We've got the animal part of the mind, the unconscious animal, which is pretty much automatic. It works on safety, feelings, and emotions. It generally doesn't have a linguistic capability, so it won't be able to really voice what's going on. It will just alert us via emotions and feelings, which is why, you know, if you walk, the example of the marsh, you walk past someone, it will trigger this real fear in them, because in the map, which defines meaning, stores, programs, memories, and knowledge, the key of all the propaganda is defining what's in the map. If you can define mass as working, the rational mind will basically look to that and it will act accordingly. A large number of the public are not aware, critical enough to actually analyze what's in their own knowledge. And that's why sometimes when you ask them questions, they get very confused, because they actually don't know why they're doing anything. So the key really is what's in the map. And the elephant in the room is that the emotions get triggered by what's in the map. And if we try to fight it with logic, we really won't get far. The key is delivering information into the map so the animal doesn't get triggered and the person stays in a rational state of mind. But of course, the propaganda is designed to do just the opposite. So really what you'll find is that most people will get into this conflict of being, you know, they may want to go down one pathway, but if the horse wants to go down a different one, that's what's going to happen. So someone might want to take off their mask, but they might be scared to do so. So this is where so much of the propaganda is not really designed to reach people consciously, because it really wouldn't, because it doesn't make any sense most of the time. It's completely illogical. But they're not worried about that, because they know if they can get it into the map, the horse will go into autopilot and the horse will go towards safety every time. I mean, if someone has a phobia, they pretty much can't consciously overcome it when it's a phobic response. If it's a small fear, sometimes they can. So it's really understanding these forces are the key. And in the next slide, I've told this story a few times, we're going to see an example of why it's so key. Because if we don't understand these forces, because most of them are hidden and invisible, is that in this instance here, we have Mary, and this is a true story. And Mary had a water phobia for 20 years. And she had been with this particular therapist for 18 months, and she had had therapy for 20 years with no success. Then one day, this guy, Roger Callahan, accidentally fixed her water phobia. But it's fair to say that Mary consciously knew that water wasn't dangerous, but that had no effect on her behavior, because the horse, that unconscious mind, because in the map it said water is dangerous, the unconscious mind overtook to keep Mary safe. Roger did something pretty much accidental, but a few therapies have come from that one day, is that the information that water is not dangerous dropped into the map. You know, the information in the map changed. So therefore, the horse didn't need to take over. So Mary was able to stay rational. And in this story, Mary actually ran to the water, and Roger was worried she was going to jump in, and she turned around and said, "It's okay, I know I cannot swim." So once the information got in the map, she then became rational. So really, in summary, what we're seeing is that choice architecture is really mapping out our options and our decisions. So they effectively lay the tracks. So when you think about the standard, you know, I've been X'd 3 times and I call X, but I'm so glad, otherwise it would have been so much worse. That is predictive programming, where they've laid the pathway already. So people don't need to think, they can just access that already laid pathway. So that's why it's really important to understand these forces, and hopefully now you'll see why this is so profound, because what Neil's talking about is in fact this programming ahead of time to create the pathway. And with this model now, we're able to really explain so much of how they've done this and how they've used the forces, which are predominantly emotions and feelings, to take people down one particular pathway over another. And what's so interesting about this is people largely are not aware of those forces that are taking them down there. So they're trying to rationalize with logic, and that's why they're getting quite confused and going around in circles. And talking of going around in circles, I think this next piece is really key, because when we understand that emotions and forces pretty much are the elephant in the room, they are the fuel to behavior, that then we're going to see what is actually fueling the addictions to safety and the addictions to compliance and everything else. So there's a thing called a compulsion loop. And so much about what's going on with today's society is actually come from what's known as gamification. And gamification is where the game designers pretty much worked out what motivates us, and they can get us hooked onto many games, and a lot of people are. And they can get people, keep them very engaged and very interested. So the basic model of the compulsion loop is effectively anticipation, action, then reward. So the anticipation is very key, because if you anticipate a reward, the dopamine will go up, creating action, and then you'll get the reward. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you only get the reward 50% of the time, the anticipation goes through the roof. This is why the casinos and the slot machines are designed the way they are. They create such a huge dopamine spike from the anticipation of winning that actually outweighs the dopamine from winning. So in fact, the anticipation of winning far exceeds actual winning. This is why when people do win, they continue to play, because it's the anticipation of playing that's the issue. And this is just a vulnerability of the brain, because they've been designed from Skinner's models to actually drive that dopamine up. But what you've got is that if the reward doesn't satisfy us at a deep level, we will go round and round on this treadmill. And that's when we look at things like hedonic loops, which most of the billionaires are stuck in, that they can't get enough money to feel purposeful. So they just keep wanting more and more because it's like a drug. The hits need to get harder the more we go on. But what you'll see is that this basic model is really driving so much of our behavior because it's not exiting. And what I mean by that is the reward is not providing the satisfaction that we need. And of course, you know, you'll see these compulsion loops going around in lots of society now where, you know, go get this, get the thing, and then because you're getting this hit of dopamine, it's the anticipation that's the key. And what this model shows us is that compulsion loops can actually be driven very quickly by withdrawal. So if you think about the needs that we have as humans, right, which are basically our rewarding activities, if that was taken away from us, lockdown, what that does is that creates a huge desire to get that back. And then if the people are told the only way out, so you offer them a clear way to restore the reward, that creates a huge amount of dopamine and a huge amount of desire to get back what you lost. Humans are predominantly driven by avoiding losses. So you can actually see now from a structural perspective why these things were done. Yes, they made no logical and they had no science basis to go ahead, in my opinion, but you can see why they were done because they were the ultimate drivers of compliance. And it's only when you understand the psychology and the structure behind it that it starts to make sense. And those just out for pleasure, this may be enough, but for those out for mastery and development, and this is from the game design, this model generally doesn't satisfy people who are looking for deeper meaning, which is why roughly 10% of the population would never fall for what happened. So a compulsion loop, if we look at it, is effectively a deep need, creating forces that get someone onto an action, but the reward doesn't provide an exit. So what happens is they go round and round and round and round. And these forces are just at play. So of course, by creating more fear and whatever creates that. So people are caught in this. This begins to explain 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles, not enough. 2 shots, 3 shots, 4 shots, not enough. If you now think about compulsion, on the next slide, I'm going to play a 2-minute video. And what you'll begin to see, hopefully, look out for compulsion, because you'll see compulsion, but not logic.
It feels very hot too. Used to it. I don't mind wearing it. I guess I'm just used to it, I guess.
I just had it on. I forgot it was on.
You forgot it was on? Are you vaccinated? Why are you wearing a mask outside? What's your thought process?
See, he doesn't know why he's doing it.
No comment.
I just feel like I have to wear it. I don't know why. I just want to wear it. Yeah, I guess if my friends wear them, so like if I might as well just see. I feel like I won't take off my mask until everybody does. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Pressure. It's role modeling, right?
I mean, it's just there's a lot of anxieties for taking the mask off, you know, for the first time. So it's
because
probably,
it's been so long.
yeah, it's like a social anxiety at this point. It's just, you know, mental and stuff.
So it's virtually impossible to get coronavirus outside while you're vaccinated.
Okay.
Does that change your thought process at all?
Yeah, not really. I'm just gonna keep wearing it. I personally still wouldn't want to take the risk anyway. I don't trust anyone else, so I'm just doing it for my.
Even if the science said it was like basically impossible, it still doesn't matter?
Yeah.
Extra precaution.
Because I want to protect others, and there's still a risk no matter what.
So the science says it was virtually impossible to get the coronavirus when you're vaccinated or to spread it while you're outside. Yeah? Does that change your thought at all?
I know that. But it also sets an example, a visual example. That's how I feel.
Because you almost feel like almost a compulsion if you look, because you've been doing it for so long.
That's exactly what I think. It's like a pacifier.
It's very interesting.
It has a pacifier.
Sure.
You want to take it away, be surprised, don't take it away.
I like a virtue signal.
Yeah. It's also a little bit of a protest.
The protest being like,
Well, I shouldn't be given the privilege to
to not wear a mask.
Not only have I been double vaccinated, I had COVID.
So you're triple.
I'm triple.
So why? So why do you think you're doing?
I think
It's virtually impossible to get coronavirus outside while you're vaccinated.
yeah. I think it's because I have been so infuriated with people who didn't wear a mask when the whole year. So it's like a display of, I still feel.
Like my roommate this year was gonna be from Singapore before everything changed, and I would just see videos on his Instagram of like going out clubbing and stuff. Just was safe over there, and it was kind of like, oh man, like if we had actually handled this well, be able to like do stuff, but I'm just stuck inside.
We handle it better. We could be doing X than everybody else.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's take them off. Come on, take them off. Come on.
Oh my
Do this to
God.
public peer pressure. Jeez.
Okay, so hopefully, I mean, obviously I disagree with the interviewer's view on some of the things he said about the jab, etc. But the key point of that video was to watch why people were doing things. It wasn't facts or science. Most of them weren't aware why they were doing things. So here's an example of one that I got caught in before, that I had ice cream related to something positive. So anytime I got stressed out, I'd reach for ice cream. I'm happy to say that I broke this by using some of the techniques we've got now. And it's relatively straightforward, because what's going on is this an unconscious pattern. Once you can find a way to bring it fully conscious and the whole brain state, the pattern generally collapses. And that's why this is really key. The emotion locks and fuels the loop. We tend to focus on trying to resist it. That actually just increases the desire to have it. Because what you're seeing is these forces have got to go somewhere. So if you're trying to resist these, that generally don't work, because they build up and then you end up, willpower can't hold them back. But the key is to actually break what's known as a cognitive pathway. When the pathway changes, the forces will go a different way. And that's really key. I think this is so profound in the answers that it can give us from behavioral science and the understanding of emotions, how we could literally resolve so many of the issues that we face today. So really, we mapping out behaviors, to really understand this choice architecture. When we have more than one option, what are the forces that take us down one? So if we look at, this is another point that's really important. We generally think that one problem has one cause, and this is known as single cause fallacy, and it's generally not true. So if you think about that video, you had examples of people that were scared, like the lady that was double vaxxed and had COVID. You had people that wanted to conform, those that, until my friends take it off, I'm not going to, and those that wanted to avoid confrontation. Now, people may have 1, 2, 3 of these and many others, but logic is not going to fix some of these. That's why it's important. It's got to get the information into the map is the key, and then the forces stop being driven. So in summary, hopefully now that behavior model, you can see how we can start to map out things, and we can really start to strategize solutions. We know what the board is now. It's really moving from A to B and the pathways, and then the pieces. The drivers are key, the forces, and the people's perception. And when you understand each of these things, you really do begin to see why people do what they do. Hopefully now we understand the compulsion loop, which is where we get caught going round and round and never solving something. And any behavior that you do that you don't want to do may generally have this element to it. But really the key is emotions are the elephant in the room for so many reasons. But one of them is because generally as humans, we have a low EQ. We don't really understand why they drive us the way they do, because it's an unconscious component, and because that unconscious component does not have a linguistic capability. So we have to find a way to understand what's driving us. And it makes sense that logically we wouldn't understand that, because we don't understand it linguistically. So yes, I think when we delve into this deeper, we can really get so many answers on this. And I feel that particularly on the project, we now can see this quite clearly. So if you'd like to support the project, please, you could donate here, and going to open out for Q&A.